Hello. I would like to um, present on my research on the African American composer Jacob Sawyer. Sorry, the title here is cut off a little bit, but it's Reconstructing the Live Performance Schedules and Reception of African American Minstrel Music Composer Jacob J. Sawyer. Um, so, Actually, this goes back to when the latest edition of the Grove Dictionary of American Music was being prepared. The editor or the editorial team sent out emails through various email lists looking for authors. And I had projects to work on, but I thought maybe if I choose some small articles, then I could write 2, 3 articles. And so I looked through the list, and one of the names I found was Jacob J. Sawyer. I saw that they wanted 300 words, and I thought I can write 300 words about anything. That's what I thought. So I did not know Jacob Sawyer, and I like challenges. I like to learn new things, and I like forgotten composers. So I wrote the editors. I want to write about Jacob Sawyer. And I also signed up for a couple other articles. But anyways, I was wrong about being able to write 300 words. But at a later time about that. Now I had lessons learned from a project on the musical life of the Germans in Brno during the 1920s, which I did many years ago, and two of those lessons were that composers forgotten today were not necessarily minor composers at that time, and old music dictionaries and newspapers from the time of the composer are very useful. Those things that I had learned before. So now, this is what I found on Jacob Sawyer that was published. It was published in Eileen Southern's Biographical Dictionary of Afro-American and African Musicians in 1982. And this is the entire article on Jacob Sawyer. You notice that he was born circa 1859, which turned out to be a wrong year. So there was a question mark too. And that he flourished in the late 19th century, so there was no date of death. It says little is known of the career. He was highly regarded as pianist-composer during his time. He toured with the Higher Sisters. Now, I looked up the Higher Sisters, and I had heard of the Higher Sisters before. They were very famous at that time. They were pioneers of African American musical theater. So this sparked my interest. And what else does it say? A press notice referred to him as Boston's favorite Professor Jacob Sawyer. I thought that was interesting. When he played on a local concert. Trotter includes one of Sawyer's pieces, Welcome to Aramiage, in the 1878 survey. So I also found Trotter's book, which is a very important book, and I found the piece that was printed there. There was nothing said about Jacob Sawyer, just a piece printed. So that's essentially what I had, and that was not enough for 300 words about Jacob Sawyer, nor was there anything new. Now, I had my lessons learned from the project I mentioned before, so I wanted to look for newspaper databases, and here listed quite a few. Most of them are specific newspapers, but one that seemed very promising, 19th century U.S. newspapers from Gale Cengage Learning. And that particular database is an online archive of primary source content. It includes full-text digital facsimiles of approximately 500, I want you to remember this number, 500 urban and regional newspapers, special interest publications, and illustrated papers that were published throughout the United States during the 19th century. That's from their website. And it says here 1.8 million pages. That sounds like a pretty good number, but please remember 500 newspapers and 1.8 million pages. So in that database, I actually found that one article that referred to Jacob Sawyer as our favorite Professor Jacob Sawyer. It was published in the New York Globe, and I had the reference before, but I had to search for it, and I found this in that particular database. But I still didn't have anything more than what Eileen Southern had for her 1982 dictionary. Now, so I was searching for a long time. I did some Google searches because I didn't know where else I could look, and eventually came across some genealogy databases. Ancestry.com, genealogybank.com, newspaperarchive.com, newspapers.com. And those are, I think, the more recent subscription prices. And now these are databases. These are commercial databases. They are not research databases. They are research databases, but they're commercial. One has to subscribe to it with individual subscriptions. So it's not a huge amount, but it is quite a bit of money if you want to subscribe to it for a longer period of time. But what is really interesting is that compared to the 500 newspapers and 1.8 million pages, genealogybank.com had 7,000 newspapers and more than 1 billion records. Newspaperarchive.com had more than 7,800 titles. Newspapers.com has 4,400 plus titles with 202 million pages. So what the 19th century newspaper database had was very, very little compared to these commercial databases. And so I initially signed up for a free trial and started finding newspapers, and then really subscribed to them later. So this is one of the articles I found. This is actually, as it turns out, Jacob Sawyer was in Cincinnati for a few months in 1879, and he applied there for a music teacher position. And there were other positions as well, and there were a number of applicants, and at least one of the applicants tried to bribe a board member, and that's why it became a big deal and was written about in newspapers. And since Jacob Sawyer was one of the applicants, it was written about him too. And this is one article he wrote as a postcard actually to the newspaper, just to correct something that was previously misstated. Now, just to make sure, it was not Jacob Sawyer who tried to bribe a board member. In fact, Jacob Sawyer didn't have any money to bribe anybody. But one thing is very interesting here, that he was in contact with Theodore Thomas, who was a very famous German-American conductor, founder of the Chicago Symphony and New York Symphony, and was at the New York Symphony and founded Chicago Symphony. Anyways, now this means something for Jacob Sawyer to have been in personal contact with Theodore Thomas, who was in Cincinnati at that time. Anyways, I also started finding census records. So in the United States, census is taken every 10 years. So I found census records from 1860, 1870, and 1880. And it's very small to see, but there is Jacob Sawyer here and another Jacob Sawyer here. This is a father and this is a son, but that didn't tell me that it was the Jacob Sawyer that I was looking for, because there were many Jacob Sawyers in the United States. It was a very common name. Jacob is very common, Sawyer was very common, and Jacob Sawyers were very common. Uh, but what helped was at least one of his sister's name is Ellen, um, or Ella, sometimes listed, as she was probably called when she was really little. So, anyways, here's another record, the 1870 record: Jacob Sawyer, the father; Jacob Sawyer, the son; and Ellen, the sister. And the 1880 record. And I forgot which of these lines, and it's difficult to see right now. In any case, I still didn't know it was the right Jacob Sawyer until I found in one of the articles that I found, saw a reference to Miss Ellen Sawyer. So there was an article about a group that Jacob Sawyer led, and in that group was Miss Ellen Sawyer. And when I saw this, I knew I had found the right Jacob Sawyer, because in all of these 3 census records that I had found, well, I had found many others, but that didn't make too much sense in terms of date or location or both. But once I had found this newspaper, I knew I was looking at the right Jacob Sawyer, because Ellen, or Ella, was the sister of Jacob Sawyer. And so I still didn't know the exact date of birth, because census records don't list those dates of birth. They only list the date on which the census record is taken, up here, and then they list the age of a person. So here, Jacob Sawyer was 13. The 10 years earlier, Jacob Sawyer was 4. And I could match the date the census was taken and how old he was, and I could, from all 3 of these census records, and I could narrow down the date of birth. And all 3 put him into Boston, which Eileen Southern had already said. And after many more hours of searching, and probably while new records were being added to some of these genealogy and ancestry databases, I found the birth record. Here I cut this off, but it's the second to last. Jacob and A is actually wrong, but this is the right Jacob Sawyer, born on November 5th, 1856. So Eileen Southern was quite a bit off. I mean, she had included a question mark, of course. So she didn't know, she did not have this birth record. And I also eventually found the death record. So here, second to last, Jacob J. Sawyer. B stands for black. That's they have the color column. He was 28 when he died. Address, and then it says here he died from complications of tuberculosis. And then I knew why he was forgotten and why it was so difficult to find. Well, I wanted to mention, of course, even if I knew that he was born in the second half of the 1850s, if I didn't know the date of death, he could have lived until the 1940s, if he became very old. So that actually gave me a very broad span to search for, to look for. It wasn't until I found this record, which was many, many weeks later of searching, that I actually could narrow that time period to search. Between his birth in 1856 and his death in 1885. So this was 1885. Where does it say the year? Up here. And then it says the month and the date when he died. Anyways, I also found sheet music. I searched in WorldCat, of course, to see what libraries hold of music that was composed by Jacob Sawyers. They would usually not catalog, well, at least I couldn't find anything, any cataloged manuscripts, but there seem to be many publications of Sawyer's music, actually published with publishers, and some libraries had a few. But most importantly was the sheet music collection of the Library of Congress. And in that sheet music collection, which has been digitized over the past 10, 15 years, so it's digitally available online, I found his scores. So now I actually, yeah, I will go back to that later. I want to show some of the scores. There's always, so those are sheet music scores. They're only a few pages long. And Jacob Sawyer wrote piano music, and he also wrote vocal music. And in each case, they're published piece by piece. So just 4, 5, 6 pages long, and they have a cover page. On the cover page, of course, it says the composer, and it says an affiliation. So when this was published in 1879, I believe, he was the pianist for the Higher Sisters. And there's also some kind of person that is being honored, or in which this piece is dedicated to. And that can give clues as well, biographical clues. Here's another one from 1881. So now you will already see that although Jacob Sawyer was African American, he was a black composer, he wrote minstrel music, and he worked for black minstrel ensembles. So after the Civil War, a lot of African American black musicians and actors got into the minstrel business because they could actually earn a relatively decent living in that business. That doesn't change the fact that it was and is a very racist genre. Now, I've actually analyzed the lyrics of Jacob Sawyer and compared them to some of the songs written by white composers, and they're much less racist, but they are nevertheless racist. Specifically, Jacob Sawyer composed for minstrel shows, and so if we see the title, the Coonville Guards Song and Chorus, that is because the Haverly minstrels actually had a show, an entire minstrel show with many sketches, acting, singing, playing, dancing. So a full show that had that title. So, and we see that in a lot of Jacob Sawyer's music and other composers as well, that they use the entire show's title then to write a piece for that. In fact, he also wrote one for the Higher Sisters, but that title is not reflected in this particular example. Anyways, here are a few other title pages. So Jacob Sawyer, this is from 1883, and at that time he was the pianist of the Slayton Ideal Company, and he wrote several of these songs. And so what the publishers did, they usually printed one of these cover pages for 5 different songs, but they were all published separately, and then they just put this star next to it to say, okay, in this piece of sheet music there is this piece, right? Here's another one, and that must have been 84 or 85. I forgot the exact year. And that was written for the Nashville students, which was directed by Jacob Sawyer. So with those dedications and the affiliations, I could reconstruct the I could reconstruct for sure the affiliations. And so I found evidence that he worked for the Higher Sisters between 1877 and 1880, then performed with the Louisiana Jubilee Singers. Now, that may have been a one time thing when they just came through town in Boston. In 80 and 81, he was the musical director of the Heavily Colored Minstrels. And then in 82, he performs as a pianist or assists with the Virginia Jubilee Singers, the Sam Lucas Jubilee Songsters, and the Maryland Jubilee Singers, also ensembles that I think just came through town, and he was asked to be the pianist. So that's what they did. Not all the entire ensemble was touring. Some were touring, and some musicians were locally hired. But in 1883, for sure, he was the pianist of the Slayton Ideal Company, and in 84 through 85, through his death, essentially, he was the musical director of the Nashville Students. So other articles I found that mentioned him, there are many such articles that I found in those databases, and this might be a good time to exit out here and go to my browser, and I want to briefly show. So this is genealogybank.com. So if I type in Jacob Sawyer and just hit search, then I will actually have 2,103 search results, but most of these are not the Jacob Sawyer that I'm looking for. So I have to actually include some kind of range. So let's say, okay, he was born in 56, so let's say 75. And once I knew that he died in 85, so I can, let's narrow it to 88 and then update the results. 225. And then I've actually find, so this is one of these articles that was in Cincinnati when this school board, when somebody bribed a school board member. But then there are also many other articles that are not related to the particular Jacob Sawyer that I was looking for. In fact, what newspapers usually do is they scan entire pages and then they run optical text recognition and maybe even a person actually making manual corrections. So you have the scan of the actual newspaper and an underlying text that is searchable. But then you may have Jacob in one article and Sawyer in a different article and music in again a different article, and you have the search result in these databases, and so it's very difficult to actually find some that relate to the Jacob Sawyer that I was looking for. Here's a newspapers.com, and I can just show a sample search, Jacob Sawyer, and there would be 778,768 matches. Of course, I would have to narrow this with regard to date. No, this is the wrong century. And so no, why is it so difficult? 18, let's say 75 through 1885 when he died, and then I have 45,000 results. I can also include music as a keyword, and then I have 22,000 results. So you can see that it's not so easy to search in these databases. I also found many documents here in Ancestry.com, And so even if I enter his name, even with a middle name, which is sometimes printed wrong, and include the exact date of birth and search, then I still have a lot of results that are unrelated to the particular Jacob Sawyer I was looking for. But here is one record that seems to relate, that is related to his birth record. So, anyways, it's these are great databases, but it's not that easy to search in it. So you have to spend a lot of time and also verifying information, and of course not all articles about the ensembles that Jacob Sawyer worked for actually mention him by name. So of course I think I found many, maybe all that exist, but I continue to actually find some that mention him by name, but there are many others that didn't mention him by name, and that may have additional, that may have put him into additional ensembles, maybe in additional locations. So, but anyways, after I had done that, I had actually enough to write a 300 word. In fact, it became, I think, a 500 word article. So this is the main biographical part. It's shorter, but I included a complete list of work, at least of what I could verify that was composed, which is primarily what was published. If there were any other compositions that were not published, they are likely lost. I have not found them. So there are quite a few, a lot of vocal work, quite a few piano works. Principal publisher is Evans and Brothers, but there are several others. So there are a few other publications that mention him. Then I tried to recreate his performance schedule based on those newspaper articles, and at this recent point, I had 65 documents that actually mention Sawyer's names, from birth records to announcements after his death, but announcements that were likely written before his death and mailed out because the organization that organized the touring of musical ensembles had to work many months in advance, and usually mailed out the same kind of promotional material, which then was printed in the newspapers. So we find his name even a little bit after his death as well. I found him in 1886, I think, the last time he was mentioned by name. So a few other examples. So music that he wrote for the Higher Sisters. So Out of Bondage was one of those shows that the Higher Sisters did, and he wrote a waltz. And so then the Higher Sisters, whenever the entire show was performed, that Out of Bondage waltz, it says it in plural here, but it's really one waltz, that was performed at that show. I'm not sure which show this piece was, but it was also written for the Higher Sisters. So there is other piano music. Then there is music written for Heavily Colored Minstrels, which was a successful black minstrelsy group owned and managed by Jack H. Haverly. And they had certain shows. One was Black Cadets, so he wrote a couple. And they had other shows. He wrote also 2 pieces for that show. And during that time period, he wrote a couple other pieces that I'm not so sure if it was part of any show or just an add-on to a show, or simply freestanding. Probably the birthday party birthday song was a separate thing, was probably not part of any show that was being performed. Now, I wanted to show the lyrics, although again, this is a racist genre, and of course, although we should do research on black musicians, especially those like Jacob Sawyer, who helped establishing the modern American music industry. Um, but we cannot perform this music, even read the lyrics, because there are racist terms and phrases that are being used even by African Americans. I mean, to this day, of course, you can listen to um, some hip hop music, some rap music that uses some phrases that we should not use. But there are reasons to why the musicians, why African American musicians use those phrases. In any case, I made a MIDI version. I typed in the this particular song into Finale, the notation program, and so there is no singing here. This is just the music itself. So just to give you an idea of how it sounds like. Um, of course, this is kind of boring just to listen to the music, because this it really becomes alive when it is being sung and then also acted out on stage. Um, but the music is very interesting. It's refreshing. It's in a romantic musical idiom. That actually brings up the question on how Jacob Sawyer was educated. Well, he went to a college, and I found a book. Um, he went to a black college, but he never graduated from that college. He left probably to work for the Higher Sisters and then other ensembles. So probably he had some lessons at that college, and he may have possibly even participated in an ensemble at that college. But primarily he was self-taught, or he was taught by doing, and as such he has a very good grasp of this musical language of that time. And I wanted to show an example that I here analyzed. So added note chords that are being used, um, 16 bars, 4-measure phrases. Of course, this is common. There's a walking bass. So if you look through here, walking bass. And that was pre-jazz period, even pre-ragtime. But in fact, in a lot of his music, when you listen to it and you would start ragging it, you have ragtime. So this was just very shortly a decade or two before ragtime emerged, but as one of the direct predecessors of ragtime. Anyways, so use of secondary dominance, use of augmented 6 chords, here also. Use of, well, there are several different ways to analyze this: added note chords, maybe unresolved secondary dominance, or 3 going to 4 would make sense from the classical perspective. And the chorus here. There is frequent use of common tone diminished 7th chords, which are embellishing chords where the root of the chord that is being embellished is essentially the seventh of the fully diminished seventh chord. So it's not a leading tone chord, it's an embellishing chord, which was used more frequently during the Romantic period. And Jacob Sawyer had a very good grasp of it. Anyways, and yes, there are instances of parallel fifths, but they seem acceptable. They didn't sound that bad. It's a romantic language for somebody who was primarily self-taught, a fantastic composer. Anyways, so they had collection called Ethiopian songs. Again, a racist term, but one that was very commonly used at that time. He wrote many for that series. Here's another example which you can look at if you want to pause the video. He wrote music for the Satan Ideal Company, which was a Jubilee troupe by African American actor and singer Sam Lucas, who was, one of the most prominent African American musicians of that time period, and one who actually became really rich through the minstrelsy and Jubilee music that he did. I mean, seriously, he was rich. That there are a number of records to indicate that, even by the standards at that time. Now, Jacob Sawyer probably wasn't rich by the time he died. He may have become rich because he was, on the way of, already was very well known. He had many pieces published. He made money through the published music as well as through lots of performances. Anyways, here's another example that you may look at if you pause the video. He wrote, arranged, or wrote pieces for the Nashville Students, which was a Chicago-based ensemble. And some of the pieces that he wrote for the Nashville Students. And that already brings me to the end. So I wanted to just show an example of rediscovering a forgotten composer. It's of course it's a difficult discovery in many aspects. It's difficult because it's difficult to find documents about the composer. They're primarily from newspapers, and it's difficult to search in those newspaper databases, the genealogy and commercial newspaper databases. It's also difficult with regard to racial issues, because this happens to be a racist genre, but one that after the Civil War many African Americans got into, including Jacob Sawyer, and a history we should know more about. For sure, I plan on publishing the piano music, which itself is very beautiful. And so there are possibilities to rediscover, but one surely doesn't want to sing a racist song from today's point of view. But we need to know about this genre. We need to know about African American composers and their contributions to 19th century music in this case. Anyways, send me an email or leave a message if you like, and good luck with your own rediscovery of forgotten composers. Thank you. Bye.